What's up everyone? Welcome to another scary Reddit stories video. Today I found one of the most haunting yet beautiful stories I've ever heard. Without wasting any more of your time, let's get straight into the story. I'll never forget that day. It was February 14th, 1996, and my first grade teacher, Miss Buford, was pleased as punch with the activity she'd created. She'd asked our class to use construction paper, ribbons, and other materials to make a Valentine's Day card, then give it to someone else. The more kids who accepted your Valentine, the more points you got, and the kid who had the most points at the end of class would win a bag of candy. I didn't care about candy. I didn't care about winning. I just needed someone to take my stupid, ugly Valentine so that I wouldn't be the only kid left still holding their own card, but no one would. I stood near the rear of the classroom, with my hands clenched into fists, fighting back tears. There was Miss Buford, standing in front of the chalkboard with a smug smile on her face. There was Kyle, the most popular boy in class, giving chocolates to anyone who took a Valentine from him. There was the rest of my class, laughing, smiling, having a good time. It was like they were a totally different species from me, and more than anything else, I wanted to be like them. I shut my eyes tight and wished harder than I'd wished for anything that someone, anyone, would take the card from my hand. "Ah, don't you have a Valentine?" It didn't sound like an answer to my prayers. It sounded like someone was teasing me. Stranger still, the voice was coming from the closet where we hung our coats. As I turned around to look at it, I remembered how dark and musty it always seemed, how I always had an irrational fear that a hand might reach out from that wall of children's clothing and pull me through to some other place. Now, however, there was another child standing in the shadows. "I'll be your Valentine if you'll be mine." I gulped, my throat dry. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? The girl stepped out of the closet and approached with strange, jerky steps. I didn't recognize her, but that didn't surprise me. I barely knew anyone at Briarwood Elementary School. The girl wore mismatched clothes, oversized rubber boots, pajama pants, a lumpy wool sweater stained with mud. They looked like clothes you'd find in the trash along a riverbank after a flood, I thought, and a shiver ran up my spine. Her hair was long and bedraggled, and seemed wet somehow, as though she'd just been swimming. She walked up beside me and grabbed my wrist with a tiny, cold hand. The shock of it made me release my grip on the clumsily made card I was holding, and before I knew it, she'd taken it and replaced it with another. For a long moment, it was like we were the only two people in the world. The noise of my first grade class faded into the background, replaced by the steady dripping of water from her hair. Her thin, wide mouth was smiling at me, but her eyes weren't. They were hollow. I gasped, and she was gone, leaving only the black construction paper heart that she had pressed into my hand. The chaos of the classroom returned to its full volume, and I thought it was over. The card in my hand had an irony chemical smell like metal and motor oil, and before I knew it, it had begun to smoke. It burst into flames before my eyes. No one could figure out exactly how the fire had been started, but I was blamed for it anyway. I was suspended from school for 2 days. Although my parents were furious, what hurt the most was that no one believed me. There was no girl matching the description I gave in my class or even in the school. But for me, laying awake at night, my eyes fixed on the closet, that knowledge was far from comforting. I was terrified that at any minute the door might creak open and she would be there again, with her child-sized shadow and those awful empty eyes staring out of the dark. Yet, when I returned to school and she still hadn't reappeared after a week, my fear and the memories of what had happened that day began to fade. Maybe my parents and the school counselor were right. Maybe I had made it all up for attention. It was easier somehow to believe that. Until it happened again. I don't remember much of Valentine's Day 1999, only that it rained, I caught a cold, my mother made me eat chicken noodle soup, and that I spent the evening reading in bed. By then, I had realized that I preferred the vivid, fantastical world of fiction over the dull, petty one that was so important to my classmates. I could spend hours with my nose in a book, barely noticing the passage of time. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard tapping against my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just the rain, but the sound was too loud and repetitive for that. A tree branch then, I thought, or maybe some weird nightbird pecking on the glass. The overcast sky outside was so dark that the window seemed to have been painted black. If I wanted to find the source of that irritating noise, I'd have to open it first. Damp, chilly night air blew into my bedroom as I leaned out into the night. No bird took flight. No tree branch scraped against my face. Rain fell silently on my still dark backyard. I was about to pull my head back indoors when two pale hands reached down from above, locking my head in place with a vice-like grip. I shut my eyes tight and felt cold lips press against my own. "Happy Valentine's Day," I screamed. My eyes snapped open, but she was already gone, swallowed by the night. My parents came running, but when they burst through the door, I didn't know what to say. I was afraid that if I told the truth, they would think I was crazy, and I knew what happened to crazy people. I'd seen black and white photos of old asylums in library books, pictures of bare padded walls, and skeletally thin figures in straitjackets, grinning madly from the shadows. I would rather die than wind up in a place like that, I thought. I kept my mouth shut. By morning, my cold had mutated into a full-blown fever. I was delirious, raving about pale hands and girls in closets while I writhed in my sweat-soaked sheets. In my dreams, I was drowning, sinking slowly into muddy water so deep that I couldn't see the bottom, the murky daylight getting further and further away with each passing second. I slept for nearly 3 full days, and even after I woke, it was weeks before I got my energy back. My parents blamed the open window and the wet winter air, but I had a different theory, one born of the scary story collections that I loved so much back then. The girl had drained me somehow. She had drunk my energy so that she could continue to exist. For a few years after that, I ditched school on February 14th, locking myself in my room with the lights on until the fateful day had passed. But I couldn't get away with that forever. Eventually, I was forced to go out into the world, where she could get to me. The year I was 13, it happened during my walk back home from the bus stop. It was a gloomy day, warm but overcast, and I still remember the sinking feeling I got in the pit of my stomach when the bright yellow bus disappeared around the corner. My house, which was barely 2 blocks distant, suddenly felt very, very far away. I was walking past the drainage sewer when her cold fingers gripped my hand and spun me around. For the first time in years, I found myself face to face with her. She had grown along with me. Her clothes were different, but they still had that cast-off, waterlogged look, and her bedraggled hair now hung down nearly to her waist. But those black empty eye sockets, those hadn't changed. "I hope you're ready for our date." With incredible strength, she dragged me off the sidewalk toward the sewer canal. She was a head shorter than I was, and probably less than half my weight, but she pulled me along as if I weighed nothing at all. Soon, we were inside the small clump of waterlogged pine trees that loomed over the concrete ditch. My feet slipped in the mud, but she kept pulling, dragging me up to the point where the soggy ground sank into a deep pond. She wasn't going to stop, I realized with horror. She was going to take me into the water with her. My fever dream came back to me with horrible clarity. The murky water filling my lungs, slowly sinking as a dead weight pulled me down. I thought that I had been screaming for help before, but that was nothing compared to the shrieks that came out of my mouth then. I threw myself onto the muddy shore, twisting and squirming, but nothing could break her grip. I took one last deep breath before the frigid water closed over my head. We must have been about 15 feet down when she stopped and pointed to something in the muck. I couldn't make out any details in the wall of mud. The greenish light was too dim, and besides, my lungs were ready to explode. Her tugging on my wrist grew more insistent until she finally did the last thing I would have expected. She let me go. Black spots flashed in front of my eyes. I wasn't much of a swimmer, and my arms felt heavy, weakened by a lack of oxygen. With the surface just a few tantalizing feet away, I realized that I wasn't going to make it. I had expected the feeling to be terrifying, but it wasn't. It was more like acceptance. I didn't have to fight anymore. I could just let myself sink. Water rushed up beneath me, and the pond vomited me out onto the muddy shore. I lay there shivering, bent double, hacking up foul water, and wondering why I had been given me another chance. Was this a curse? Some kind of sick game? I didn't even know who she was, but back at home after the longest shower of my life, I became determined to find out. There wasn't much to go on. After my near miss with the elementary school counselor, I didn't dare to risk telling anyone about my experience, and the library and internet weren't much help either. I stumbled upon a few stories of local ghosts and urban legends, but none fit the description of the girl who appeared to me every Valentine's Day. I knew that I should go back to the pond, but I couldn't bring myself to dive back into that foul-smelling greenish water in search of whatever the girl had wanted me to see. The older I got, the harder it became to keep my secret. It wasn't long before I ran out of explanations for the friends and family who demanded to know why I behaved so strangely every February 14th. During the winter of 2002, my parents had finally had enough. They insisted that I attend my high school's annual Valentine's Day dance. They refused to hear my excuses about not having a date or suffering from social anxiety. I was going, and that was that. For a time, I hoped that an oncoming snowstorm would cause the dance to be canceled, but the big blizzard that everyone was so afraid of turned out to be a light dusting of powder. With my too big borrowed suit and small circle of equally single friends, I figured I'd just have to make the best of it and hope that she didn't show up. By the end of the night, I was actually having a pretty good time. The whole thing was sort of fun once I stopped taking it so seriously, and I felt confident that she wouldn't appear in front of such a big crowd. By 10:30 p.m., smooth, slow songs were playing, and couples were rocking their way awkwardly across the squeaky gym floor. My friends, along with about half of the attendees, had already shuffled outside to be picked up by their guardians, but my own parents demanded that I stay until after the last dance. I figured I'd kill some time by walking around the plastic bleachers at the edge of the dance floor. And that was where I saw her. She was sitting in the topmost row, well beyond the slow-moving, colorful lights. If it hadn't been for the glitter of her damp hair in the darkness and that creeping feeling on the back of my neck, I never would have known she was there at all. She was wearing stained and half-torn wedding gown that, under the circumstances, looked like a nightmarish version of a prom dress. When my eyes met the hollows where hers had been, she ran a long, pale tongue across her lips. I looked away immediately, telling myself childishly that if I ignored her, maybe she would go away. But when I gave in, looked again, she had gotten even closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on her, demanding to know who she was and what she wanted from me. "Look beneath," she rasped, then stepped backwards into the darkness. I felt the heavy hand of the football coach on my shoulder. He wanted to know who I had been yelling at. I shook him off and scrambled up the bleachers. Beneath the bench where she had been sitting was a bouquet of dead roses, tied with a half-decayed ribbon. The flowers were choked with muck and trash, but under them, I spotted something: a golden heart-shaped locket. I didn't know much about jewelry, but it looked expensive. Jogging out of the gym and into the lobby, I inspected it more closely. There was an engraving on the back: RKL plus EM, February 14th, 1992. My heart skipped a beat. My father's full name was Raymond Keith Lancaster, and RKL could just as easily have been his initials. But who was EM? Why was that date important? And why the flowers? When my father picked me up 20 minutes later, I was tempted to ask him about it, but some instinct made me hesitate. "Look beneath," the girl had said. What if she was talking about more than just the flowers? Until I knew more, I decided to keep my discovery to myself. RKL. EM. Look beneath. It occurred to me that she might have been talking about my house. My father had an office in the basement, although it wasn't much of a study. Just a big desk for the models he painted, some filing cabinets and bookshelves, and a safe. I had never wondered what might be in there before. Business documents, my father had said, and I'd taken him at his word. But now, on most days, I got home from school before my parents left work, giving me about a 2-hour window to look beneath. There was something unsettling about the bare white walls and cool stillness of the basement, something that made me sure I would look up from my investigation to find her. Or, worse, my angry father hovering over me, demanding to know what I was doing, demanding to know what I had found out. In the top drawer of my father's desk, I discovered a yellowed instruction manual for the safe. It took a combination of 10 letters or numbers to open it, and 5 wrong attempts would seal it completely. I opened it on the 3rd try with EM 2141992. Just as my father had insisted, there was nothing but old paperwork inside. At first glance. Underneath it, however, was something else, an envelope full of letters that had been sent between my father and someone named Elizabeth Murphy. I realized with disgust that my father had been having an affair, but from there, the notes took an even darker turn. Something terrible had happened on the night of Valentine's Day, 1992. I know how bad you feel, Eliza had written, but you did what was best for everyone. There's no point in destroying all our lives over one little accident. One little accident? The internet was a different beast now than it had been when I had first searched for ghosts and local legends. Less than a minute after I powered up the PC on my father's desk, I was looking at a news article about a girl who'd gone missing in my neighborhood on February 14th, 1992. I recognized the gap-toothed, brown-haired girl in the photo, although the version of her that I knew was older, paler, and missing her eyes. Laura Broadwell's mother, Amanda, wasn't sure exactly what had gone wrong that night. She had been drinking pretty heavily since the divorce, and that last thing she remembered was coming in with the groceries, putting on some cartoons for her daughter, and opening a few bottles of cheap champagne. It was possible, she admitted, that she hadn't completely closed the front door. Possible, too, that 4-year-old Laura had seen the half-open door and wandered outside to see what the world looked like after dark. Unfortunately for the police, the rainstorm that swept through that night washed away any evidence of where Laura might have gone. Regular updates on the case continued for a few months afterwards, but with no leads and Laura's mother already behind bars for negligence, there was little to report. By the time Laura Broadwell appeared in the closet of my first-grade classroom, she had been forgotten by almost everyone for years. Most people in the comment sections blamed Amanda for what had happened, but no one could offer a clear explanation for what had occurred that night. Armed with my father's letters to Eliza and the knowledge that she had lived right across the street from the drainage ditch, however, I didn't think I needed one. It was easy to imagine how it might have gone. Raymond Keith Lancaster, speeding out of the neighborhood to meet his lover, a bouquet and a locket beside him in the passenger seat. 4-year-old Laura Broadwell, walking across the yard while her mother snores drunkenly on the couch, in the blue glow of her cartoons. Laura doesn't look up before crossing the road. My father, with only one thing on his mind, doesn't brake in time. Slick roads, screeching tires, and a sudden, horrible snapping sound. My panicking father checks for witnesses, but no one is looking out their windows on a rainy Valentine's Day night. He sees the drainage ditch and the pond beyond it. He wraps the body in a tarp from the trunk, weighs it down, and hurls it into the water, unaware that the bouquet and locket have fallen out onto the road in the confusion. Rain washes them down the concrete ditch and into the pond, where they sink down into the mud, along with whatever was left of Laura Broadwell. He takes his car into an under-the-table shop, blaming wet roads and a fallen tree for the damages. As the days drag on, Eliza and my father realize that they're in the clear. The secret of their affair is safe, as is the secret of the death they caused one rainy February night. Was it the link between my father's crime and the holiday that drew Laura to me all those years ago? I wasn't sure, but I knew what I had to do. This year, on Valentine's Day, I went back to the pond beyond the drainage ditch by choice this time. On a burner phone, I called in a tip about where the missing body of Laura Broadwell might be found. After hanging up, I sat and spoke to the shadows on the surface of the dark winter water. I said that I would leave the locket on my father's desk that night, so that he would know that everyone he cared about would soon find out the truth. I also said that I'd leave the front door of my house open just a crack, just as it had been left open for Laura all those years ago. It's just a few minutes after midnight, and I can already hear the creak of footsteps in the hallway downstairs. I wonder what she's bringing my father for Valentine's Day. Anyway, that's the end of this story. If you made it up to here, thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more stories like this one.